Greetings, welcome back to Old Ways Rising Farm YouTube channel, where we are going to continue sewing some buckskin. Now, previously on the channel we've done quite a bit of tanning buckskin, okay? And we recently did a video on sewing buckskin leggings, starting to make some clothing from this wonderful, wonderful material. Okay? And we are going to start making a shirt to go with these leggings. Now, this is going to be a little bit more complicated of a project than the leggings were. It's going to be multiple videos. Because a lot of this we've got to slow down, take our time, and work through some decisions and processes. Okay, so it's going to be more than one video. I don't know exactly how many it's going to be. I'm putting out the first one with the first couple steps. I'll label it 1 of N. I'm not sure what N will be. If you're watching this 3 years in the future, if the world still exists then, this is 2024 when I'm filming this, so who knows. They will be one of however many videos are in the series. But for now, I'm just going to leave it 1 of them. I'm not sure how long it's going to take us. And I have been collecting little bits of film on this, working, it's kind of an after work, after hours sort of project. So we've been a couple of weeks in 10-15 minute intervals putting this first one together. But the shirt that we're going to make is a safari shirt pattern from Pacifica Patterns, and this is the cloth prototype of said shirt. Okay, it's substantially similar to the sort of fishing shirt that I'm wearing right now. However, this isn't a specific tutorial on one specific pattern. Pacifica Patterns is a Hawaiian company that doesn't even exist anymore. They're defunct, right? So this is I got the pattern used, right, for this because I liked it. This is more about how to think about sewing with buckskin as a material. Because you can't just take exactly the same approaches when you're working with leather that you do when you're working with cloth. Particularly a couple places, right, like here at the collar, where we have 2 layers of collar, 2 layers of shirt, 2 layers of this little, what would you call it, an epaulette? Mm-hmm. Or something? Okay, hey, I got it. There's, in some places here, 6 or 8 layers of cloth thick. That will not work with leather. Okay? When you're sewing these things, you'll often, again, we'll just look at the shoulder section. Sew something together and then just run another seam over top of it. Again, that won't work in leather. You get 1 seam in 1 area. So you have to think through some of these things and change up the pattern a little bit. At the same time, leather facilitates that because it will not unravel. Whereas this, open weave flax cloth ravels if you look at it crooked. Okay? You look at that stuff in the wrong tone of voice and it's starting to unravel. So everything has to be doubled over with multiple seams to keep it together. Whereas with leather, you don't have to do that. Okay? So we're not modifying the geometry of the pieces, but we do have to modify the construction a little bit. We'll have to modify our seam allowances a little bit. And what I really want this video to be about is how to think through working with a modern pattern in this very traditional material. Okay? We will do more very traditional styles of clothing, but part of what this channel is about and what I like to talk about when I'm teaching things related to these traditional skills is that these traditional skills have a place in the modern world. Okay? This is not living history, this is living culture. Right? So I want to encourage you to think about ways to take these skills and bring them into, your life with respect to your culture and your traditions and, integrate those things together. So I want to talk about working with a modern pattern here. We will do more, the leggings, very traditional construction technique, very traditional pattern, just measured directly from the body, right? We will do more of that with buckskin as well. And if you want to see some traditional patterns of how all of that goes together, go check out the Old Ways Rising Farm Patreon. We have a big compilation of historic texts on leather making and leather working that has tons of information on, very traditional construction techniques. Okay, there's a link in the description box below. In this first video, we're going to go through this much. Okay, this is just the front panel of the shirt. Some modifications in how it's cut out to accommodate the size of the leather sheets that I have to work with. Okay, so we're kind of adding an extra yoke in here, and we are adding a stitch. This is a herringbone or S-type applique stitch, depending on whose book you're reading. And this was not something that I did on the leggings, so we're adding a new technique. We go into the stitch in detail. That's a lot of the content of this video, is how to make this stitch. And the rest is the first installment of how to modify patterns and get, again, your cloth pattern to work with leather. Okay? So, if you're interested in all this, come join in. The very first thing that we need to do here is to duplicate our pattern. So the pattern that I used to make the prototype is this pattern from Pattern Pacifica. It's a Hawaiian company, and this is their safari shirt pattern. Sadly, they're defunct, so you kind of got to go into used stuff land and internet auctions to find these. This was just I happened to find one that fit. I was looking for something in the safari shirt genre to base my little project on. And I found this one, and the numbers added up, and it's good. There are half a dozen or so variations on the theme of a safari shirt or a cut-down duster jacket that you could use as a base for this. Just find one you like. This is the one that I found. But you may not be able to find this exact pattern because they are a company that is no longer in business. Now, as we discussed in the previous video on making the leggings part of this whole thing, sewing leather is not the same as sewing cloth. You have different concerns. Okay, you don't have to worry about raveling. You do have to worry about bulk. So we're going to make some changes. We don't want to make changes to the original pattern because I want to make more shirts off of this. Okay, and because it's old, this was a 60s pattern, 1960s pattern. It's very old and brittle, and you can see it's trying to tear here just from one use. Okay, so these pieces are going to tear, get taped, and be traced onto parchment paper for making more pieces of clothing, and then that will just replace the original pattern pieces, right? Just throw these away as they rip up and make new ones. But for the leather, I need a much stronger material, so I'm going back to this like manila paper, like cardstock kind of stuff. And we're going to exactly duplicate these. So we need to first trace the outline, okay? And to do this, you can just make a couple of marks along the top and then come in with your square and discover that it's magically already been done, right? And mark these lines. You don't want to watch me do all of that boring stuff. And then the same here. This is a straight line, this is a straight line, that's a straight line, okay? You can do the same on these edges, but then on these curved edges, you definitely need to trace very carefully around them. And we need to get all of the details. So these registration marks need to be traced around. Also, this is the front of the shirt. So we have our buttonholes. Those need to get marked. So I punctured these so I could mark them with a pencil when I made the prototype. So I could just go in with the pencil now again. Mark all of those. Okay. Here's the attachment for the top of the pocket. And then the outline for the pocket itself. When this is all done and we'll go through each of these dots that I'm making so I can do the same thing on the leather that I did on the cloth. Just take one of these mechanical pencils, extend the lead, poke it through the hole, and make a pencil mark on the leather. Okay. There's those. Now, there is some question as to where my seam lines are going to be on the front. This side seam, this is where it joins at the side, this is the front, and this line here is where the fold is to pull the lapel in on the cloth version. This, I'm pretty sure, is going to be cut as originally designed. This, I'm pretty sure, is going to be cut as originally designed. The sleeves, I'm going to have to figure out as I go. And where it joins with the yoke is going to be complicated, and I'm going to have to figure out as I go. But for now, I definitely want to mark where all of these reference points are. So this fold line here, just going to pull it down a little bit, just mark off of there. And then the same thing here, I can pull up a little bit, mark the bottom of the fold line, and then I can just kind of slide this up, use it as a gauge. Just gauge where that is. Mark the fold line a little bit there, and pull it down. Mark the fold line there. And then I have two sets of marks which are also square with the bottom of the shirt that I've already marked. So I can mark that there. Can mark these two here. And then join the lines. Okay. And then label it fold line. So without making any alterations at this stage, I'm going to transfer all of the lines off of this pattern to the new pattern piece, cut it out, and then we'll talk about how we're making some of those initial modifications. After all of that tracing and transferring, we get this. This is just an exact replica of the original pattern that is now stiff enough that I can put it onto the leather. Okay. This is the front. I've also done the pockets and the pocket flaps, and we'll talk about all of those in turn. But to start with for here, there's things that you have to modify, things that you can't modify, and things that you may choose to modify. So what I am wearing is the prototype for this project. Okay, this is there we go, this way. I still have to do this final seam and the buttonholes on this yet, but otherwise it's finished, right? This is the finished shirt. This is what it will look like. I'm gonna do this differently, probably omit this altogether so I could just use a finger weave belt. But the rest is going to be pretty much intact, except for some areas where I have to change things. The collar, you end up with about 6 layers in some cases of fabric, putting this collar in. That won't work in leather. The lapel, so that's going to have to change. But the lapel, this section, can't change. If you see where this curves up in, right in there, that comes from this piece of the pattern. It gets folded down and curved in like that. Okay? So this whole upper section has to be preserved as it is. If you change anything here, you're changing the whole orientation regulation of the pattern. So again, if you're going to do a modern tailored pattern in leather, make it in cloth first so you see what's going where and what's doing what. Okay? The top piece here over the shoulders, this is 2 layers thick in cloth. That'll just be 1 layer thick in leather. And I'll do a simple overlap seam where it meets with the back. Same, I'll do a simple overlap here instead of a turned in seam here at the shoulder because you don't want a big bulky junker there. Okay, and the collar will be sort of a butt joint with lacing over the edge. Right. But I don't need to worry about that right now. What I need to do is get this cut out and start working on the pockets. But there's a modification I want to make, and that is I want this to come almost to my knee. Okay, so if you watch the video I did on the leggings, they're 2 leggings and breechcloth is 3 separate pieces of material, and then the shirt hangs down and covers over all of the gaps where they're joined together. Okay, so I want to be able to lean over and still have the tail of the shirt at least down to the middle of my thigh. So I'm going to add some more material to it, and I really want to add about my finger length. So if I look at the construction of this prototype, the bottom hem, okay, is a double hem. We are 3/16 there for the first turnover, and then 3/4 inch for the second turn. Okay, and that gives it finished seams all the way around. And then my finger is about 3.5, 3 3/4, somewhere around there. So a reasonable addition to make is 3 inches longer. So I'm going to take the bottom of this piece, cut a 3-inch strip, and just tape it on there, and then transfer these lines the rest of the way down. Okay, I will do the same on these 2 back panels. I will add to the bottom there. Okay, and it won't be hemmed, which is why I'm subtracting a little bit. I'm not going a full 3.5, 4 inches, because I won't be taking up that length in the hem. So I don't need to go that much longer. Okay. So 3 inches will be good. 3 inches will be fine. And that will be a little bit cheatable because it's plenty long. And I will leave a little bit of a slit here in the bottom for movement. Okay. So if it ends up a little bit longer, it'll just have a little bit more slit, a little bit less long, a little bit less slit. It'll be okay. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I will pull out the hides and pick 2 hides that I can cut these fronts from, because each of these is going to take a full hide. I won't be able to get 2 of these out of the hide. I'll have a lot of hide left over, and those little patches will be the pockets and other bits. So I'm going to get to doing this, and then we'll rejoin. We're looking over our pattern pieces. I've been cutting these out. This is the front with the little extension. Okay, a little 3-inch extension there. And this is the back with, again, a little 3 inches of extra for dangly down. Right, there's your technical term for the day. And I got these out and was putting them on the hides to see how everything lined up and what I could cut out of what and what I couldn't. And when I was doing the leggings in the previous video, I got lucky and I could cut the leggings out in one piece. I had enough large hides to do that. Okay, here I can't. This is a gigantic flap of fabric. Okay, the back isn't as bad because the back is yoked. So the back has this going on. Okay, so since the back is yoked, this is a smaller piece. The front, however, is gargantuan. And we need to cut it down a little bit. So if we look at how this is made, this piece here gets folded in and turned over, and that's this lapel piece. Okay? And you can see there's this big strip, far more than we need to reinforce the buttonholes. Okay? But that is just all of this curling in here. And when you're making this out of cloth, it makes sense just to cut it on a straight line, no big deal, a little extra cloth used, no harm, no foul. But when we're doing this in leather, harm and foul are received by wasting that much material. Okay? So down here along the buttons, all we need is enough fold over to get behind the buttons and allow to reinforce that strip. Okay? So that's the first thing. I mark this out. Buttons are here. All I need is enough to fold over for the buttons and have a little bit of seam that won't interfere with the buttonhole maker. Okay? And on one side, I don't even necessarily need to do that much, although I don't think it's going to bother me. That's why I only made my 3-inch strip come to here, and that whole rectangle is going to get cut out. Now, when I'm looking at this fold over for the lapel, again on cloth, this is so thin, it's not a big deal to have that doubled up, right? But in leather, it can be a big deal if that's cut out of a thick section. So what I really want to do is to be able to get this into, one of the strips where the leg meets the belly, so that I can have this fold over be as thin as possible. And the same thing, I want this fold over section here, where I'm doubling the thickness, to come from a belly strip. Okay? So by doing a cut and cutting this off and making an extra yoke, that will both allow me to puzzle piece this in a little bit better and to get the absolute thinnest material I can here and here. Okay? Because if I get the absolute thinnest material here, then this is going to be moving toward the spine and into thicker leather. So it'll make this thicker. So I want to shift this over. Okay? Even if I was cutting this out of one piece, I want to shift it over. That means I'm going to make a cut here. It's not going to alter the final pattern piece. It is just going to be an extra seam, right? It's just patchwork quilt strategy, not substantially editing the pattern strategy, right? So I'm going to cut this and there'll be an extra seam. I don't want that seam, let me just fold this pretty much the way it will be when it's worn, right? I don't want that to show in the lapel, so I want it to be as close down to the top of this pocket as possible. Right, if I look at where the yoke comes across here, it's relatively high up. The seam is going to be a little bit lower, okay? Straighten that again so you can see it. So I put a line across right where the top of the pocket is. That's going to be a reference point. Now if I look at my pocket piece, this is a fold and tuck, this is a fold and tuck, this is a fold and tuck right there, okay? Mm-hmm. Because this is sewn along these seam allowances. And that's necessary when you're doing it in cloth because you want everything to be a finished edge so it doesn't ravel, okay? But in leather, leather doesn't ravel. So I don't need to do this. I'm just going to cut this out of one piece, and that will be that. So, I have the scissors, okay? I will just clip off those seam allowances on this pocket piece. Okay. We don't need that. But this across the top, and I will actually need to trim this down a little bit there too, but I'll do that later. Right now we're just figuring out where to make our seam, okay? So this across the top, I'm going to lace this down, and I need this here, okay? So I actually need an overlap, this to go up a little, that to go down, because this piece and this piece are all going to get sewn in together at the same time. Okay? So I need the back of this shirt to come up a little bit. So I need to mark that seam allowance. There's my pencil. And I can just use the back of this pocket as a straight edge here. We'll deal with the details of the pocket itself in a bit. Okay. Okay, then I'll transfer that line over here. Okay, so we're going to cut on that line, and that will be the bottom piece. this will be, well, I'll do it right now. Okay. Okay. So there's my bottom piece, and I'll cut this slab off here as well. But then this needs to overlap, so I'm going to, it needs to be in this position, but overlapping to there. So I'm going to take some tape, extend this, and make another seam allowance that will feed underneath. And then the pocket will go on there, and it will all stitch together. These are our modifications. We cut it here, and then the top I extended down with that little yellow strip. And the top is going to end up going over the bottom when we make it, like that. Okay. You can see that all lines up just with that extra seam allowance. Okay. Now, if we look at this hide would be too small. You know, before, there's no way I could get that positioned in here that I could take the whole thing out of one hide, right? But now with this cut, I can set that over there, and I can put this in here, okay? And we will get a much better utilization out of this. Now, I'm going to take my time, and I'm going to go through all of the hides that I have available and try to get the most out of the stock, right? So you always want to cut your piece out of the hide that's the smallest. You want it to just barely fit in, right? It's easy to cut a little piece out of a gigantic hide, right? But then you're wasting material. And that gigantic hide, even though, yes, you can cut the piece you want out of it, you might need to cut a piece out of that hide at a later state. So you want to cut it out of the smallest hide that you possibly can. You also have to be careful that this is, right now I'm showing you this grain side down, right, the grain side there, flush side here, okay? We want grain side out, so there's going to be a right and a left. So you have to make sure that you're cutting mirror images, okay? If you cut all of it grain side up or all of it grain side down, then you'll end up with pieces that don't get to go together right, and then you'll say, gosh golly gee whizzikers, I wish I didn't do that, right? And you'll be tanning more hides, and you'll be frustrated, right? So make sure you do that right. And that's why I am not going to try and mix laying all of these out with filming. So I need my head about me. I need to concentrate just on laying these out and cutting the best pieces out of the hides available. So I'm going to get on with that, and then we'll cut back when there's some assembly to do. The 4 pieces have been cut out quite nicely. That worked out well, and this cut pattern worked out well. I was able to get all 4 pieces out of just 2 hides. Here, stuff in my way. Get over there. There we go. Now we need to go about starting the attachment process to connect these extra, I guess you'd call this a yoke at this point, to the main body piece. Okay. Now I've already started doing this here. I did this one, the first step on this side, just to make sure everything was actually going to line up and work nicely before I started filming, in case I needed to make any last minute adjustments in strategy, but it came out quite well. So in the original piece, you know, remember this whole strip, this was cut on a straight line here. We've saved this much leather, and that's just at the expense of 1 extra seam. So that's a good thing to do for conserving our materials. Now a note, these are both grain side up. The grain's gone because this is buck tied, but this is grain side up. And when you're cutting your pattern out and there's a face to it, one side you need to cut out right side up, and the other you need to cut out upside down. Okay? So this is also true when we start to mark things. So here we need to mark, before we proceed any further, we have to mark the pockets, okay, the locations of the pocket corners. So to do that, I've just taken an awl and made a little hole so I can stick a pencil through. Okay? And then we put it over the pattern, we stick the pencil through, and you just spin it to make a little pencil dot. Okay? And you don't need to worry about that. It's not going to permanently mark the hide. It shows up pretty well on the leather, and first washing, the graphite dust is going to be gone. And this is washable leather, which is nice. So to mark the second side, we're going to flip this upside down. Line it up real nice. Okay. Make sure it's straight. And this is the downside to using this belly region, is it wants to be loose and floppy. It's going to get less and less floppy the more stuff we attach to it, but it's going to start out a little on the floppy side. Okay. So just like there, it's upside down, but we can still see all of the holes. We're just going to give a good pencil spin in each of the holes. Okay. I can see all of these well. I'm not sure how well they're going to pick up on the film. Yeah. Okay. Now, the next thing we need to do here is to mark where things are going to fold up. Because this is a seam allowance there, so that folds, and this is all going to fold down, making the lapel and the hem across the buttons. Okay, so that's all going to get folded in like that. In the cloth, you would just run a seam right across there, right? And there are sections of this up here around the neck collar where there's eight layers of cloth, okay, in the pattern as in the original pattern. Yeah, that doesn't work in leather. So we have to think about our seams a little bit differently. So this is all going to get folded in there and there. Okay, it's not going to hold real well right now. That for the seam allowance on the sleeve, and this for the hem. And the pockets here, the pocket tab is up here. So when we sew in, let me just find a random scrap, right? Just random scrap, obviously not a real pocket. When we sew in the pocket across the top, that is going to attach this section of seam. Okay? So we want to sew where the pocket in the fold isn't on each side of that pocket flap. So we need to come in here and mark come in from the edge, mark that seam from that fold, where that is. And, again, just using this as a gauge, we need to mark where this seam allowance comes around. Okay? We don't need to go too far down. We just need to kind of, and I'm just gauging off of the seam allowance on the pattern piece itself. Just kind of draw that in a little bit. Okay? So we're going to make our seam. We take this, put it there. Okay. We're going to be from there to there, and from there to there. So that's all the seam we're doing now in this step. Okay. That is a cutting error. It slopes down here a little bit. It must have stretched out a little while I was cutting it. Fortunately, it's not in a critical spot and it won't show in the final thing. But that is something you have to watch with leather. Now, I'm just going to kind of sketch across here a little bit so I can see that line. And this, I'm going to use a decorative stitch here called a herringbone stitch. And I want this to be even. So I'm going to actually measure every 3/8 inch along here. You want these stitches to be a little bit longer than your thonging is wide. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay? So we're going to actually measure that. Where's my piece of thonging? There's my piece of thonging. And if I hold this there, you can see that stitch is, my thonging is about 1/4 inch wide, and my stitches are about 3/8. So just a little bit of extra breathing room over the thickness of the thonging. When I cut this, when you cut it from a spiral, and I show how to do all of this in the previous video on making the leggings. All of the basics is in there, and this is a somewhat more advanced lesson. But when you cut it from a spiral, you're always going to have these little extra bits from going around the turn. Then you want to come back and trim it to a nice even width. I'm leaving a little bit of an extra bit there as a stopper. You'll see where that comes in when we start to stitch. Okay? Now if I put my piece back in place ever so carefully, now I can just come, I'm going to come about 1/4 inch in from the edge. Let's transfer all of those dots. Okay, now using a metal awl, I'm going to pierce all of the holes here in the main body piece. Get this done before we start to try and hold things together. I'm going to pierce through one thickness of this little yoke section. Is all this in view, hon? Because we need a double row of holes here. The more of this we do at the beginning, the easier it is. Because this first section, let me stretch this back out. Okay. Whichever you do as your first section is a pain to get started. Your second section, the piece is already attached very firmly. So this is a lot easier than this. So I want to make life as straightforward as possible. Plenty of work and problems in any project. We don't need to add extra ones. Right?
There's a life lesson in that.
Yeah, there is. There is. Okay. Now, I am going to take some of these little clips and clip the two corners. But I can't clip the middle. So I have a couple of washers here. and a couple of cow magnets. We're going to slide the washer carefully under both layers. And you can stick a cow magnet on it.
The cow magnets can be found at most agricultural stores.
Yeah, it's not hard to find in an ag store. Okay. Now, I have too many things in my way. Get some of this stuff out of there. Keep covering up my tools. Did I punch that one? No, I forgot to punch that one. Okay. Get my thonging. The thonging needs to be 6 times the length of the section that you're going to sew for this particular stitch. That's not universal, that's specific to this particular stitch. Now that this is held fairly well, I'm going to come and I'm going to punch just the first 2 of these holes all the way through. I'm going to stitch into these 2 holes. That will lock this end in place and make it easier to hold my lining as I punch the rest of those. Make sure I have a nice end trimmed. Do you want to zoom in here a little more, hon? Is all this in view then? Okay. Okay. I have a nice end trimmed here. Now to do the herringbone pattern, this is more of an advanced pattern, we need to feed the end up through the second hole. Doesn't matter which side we do it. I'm going to do it on the bottom just because it's a little easier to keep in alignment that way. So I'm going to take my bone awl and just fid that open a little bit. And I can see the hole. And I'm just going to take it, poke it onto the end, and feed that through. Now if you saw the video on the leggings, you'll know that I used a bone needle, and that does work nicely, but we're going to go through these holes so many times, just widens them a little more than I would prefer. So what am I doing here? Again, this thonging has a grain side and a flesh side. I want it to be grain side up when I pull it across. So I'm just ruching it so that it's grain side up. And then on the back, that little fat spot I left as a stopper, I want that to just come to the edge of the hole and sit there without being puckered up too much. And I'm just going to trim it a little bit thinner. That's going to end up getting tucked. You'll see what we do with that here in a minute. So there's the start. I have my little stopper piece, and I just pulled through the hole. I pulled it through the second hole. Now I'm going to come down through the first hole on the opposite side. So again, I'll fid that open a little bit, fold it over, poke it through. Grab it with your thumbnail, and now we can pull this. Now what you don't want to do is grab it all the way out here at the end and yoink it through. You'll rip your thonging. You want to pull it through enough that it's caught. Flatten this out. And then just pull it through a couple inches at a time and then go back up to the hole. Pull it through a couple more inches. Okay? Then you want to pull this snug, but without making a pucker. Okay? So we came up the second hole, down the first. Now what I'm going to do next is cross underneath and come up the first hole in the other side. So again, fit open the hole, place your thonging, the pointed end of your thonging, and then stuff it through with our little bonal. And then you see I'm just pulling it a couple inches at a time. Just like before, make sure it's nice and flat. Okay? And then check it. That is nice and flat. And just like before, pull it snug, but not so snug that it puckers the leather. Now, the next thing is we're going to cross over and make an X. You can see this is a woven, pull it over here a little bit more. This is a simple herringbone weave. Okay? And it's going to completely cover the edge of our piece of leather. So you won't see that seam as a seam. You'll see that seam as an expansive decorative lacing. Okay? So we're going to cross over and go through the second hole in the double thickness. Just like before, fit it open, place the end, and stuff it down in. And support it, pull a couple inches at a time, make sure it's going to come grain side up. Snug it. Okay. Now, we can get rid of this clip because that has locked that end in place very nicely. And we barely need this magnet anymore, but we're going to leave it there for helping us align. And I'm going to go ahead and punch the rest of these holes. After each punch, make sure that everything's still in alignment. Okay. It still stretches. You can fudge alignment a little bit, but if you don't realign after every punch, it can walk further and further and further until you get to the end of a line of stitches, especially if it's a longer line of stitches, you'll be, half inch or more off, and you can't fudge that. Okay. So, these are all started. Now, if I look at the back, let me show you the back of this. You can see the back of it, and we eventually tuck the ends. We'll do that. We'll tuck the first one here as we stitch along, and then we'll tuck the end, the finish end, when we're all done. It's an even row of stitches. It looks like it was saddle stitched on the back. Okay? So how that happens is when we're coming through the back of our piece, we backstitch into the previous hole, the hole that's already occupied. Okay? So this first hole is already occupied. I just went down the second, so I'm going to backstitch into that first hole. Again, we want to fit it open. We don't want to make that tear any bigger than humanly possible and absolutely necessary. Okay. So there's our loop. Now I'm going to take this end, feed that through that loop. So when we pull that tight, it catches nice. That'll keep that from flopping around. Okay. So there's our attachment point is done. We can trim the excess. Don't cut it completely flush. We can trim most of that excess, and now that won't be flopping in our way anymore. Okay. Now, after we make the first X, when we're on the front side, we're always going to go across the seam to the opposite line of holes and into the next hole, which is unoccupied. Okay. So on the front, we cross over and go down the next unoccupied hole. Get green side up there. Always make the small adjustments on every stitch. Okay, it's going to look a little funny when it's first getting started. That's a really long stitch there, right? But that's the process on the front side. Cross over the seam into the next unoccupied hole. And then on the back side, you're going to back stitch on the same line of holes into an occupied hole. Okay? And again, snug, but not puckering the leather. So you can see we made this really long stitch here, but we came up in the middle of it. So now again, we're on the front. Cross over into the next unoccupied hole. Okay. Flip it over. Fit it open. And you back stitch into an occupied hole. Didn't quite get that all the way through. This does take a bit of time. And if you take your time and do it well, it gives a very nice result. Okay. So now we're on the front again. In the middle of that previous stitch. Cross over the seam into the next unoccupied hole. Take your time, get everything smooth, with every stitch. That wanted to twist on me. Feed that twist down through and get a nice flat stitch. And you can see how this crisscross pattern just naturally emerges without doing a whole lot of actual over-under weaving. Okay? So it's just a simple two-part X. This just naturally emerges from that. When you're on the front, you cross over to the adjacent line of holes and go down one that's unoccupied, and then on the back, you stay in the same line of holes and go into the one above that is occupied. You just work your way all the way along. I'm going to work to the last couple stitches, and then I'll show you how we finish off the seam. We've gotten the whole length here, and you can see we've run out of holes on the top side, but we still have this little gap between this last stitch, this is the last one I went down, and the previous one. So this very, very end is going to be a little bit different, just like the very, very beginning is a little bit different, because we need to get one more stitch in, so we're going to have to reuse a hole. So on the back side, you can see we have our complete stitch pattern there and our complete stitch pattern there. We still have a gap here. So we can go again, continue the pattern as we had been, feed this through for that last pass on the back. Okay. Yep, that's through enough. Okay. Just a tiny bit twisted, but it's not going to hurt anything. we'll twist it around there too. Okay, so now we're up in that gap, and we're going to recycle this last hole on the bottom and go through that one additional time to even out that lacing gap. Okay. So you can see here on the front we have this stitch and this stitch both going down through that hole. Just like we have this stitch and this stitch both going down through that hole. So we have to have one extra stitch in the beginning and in the end in order to make the pattern look more even. Okay? And that little extra thickness there, the eye won't pick up on that as much as having a big open gap with nothing living in it. Okay? So, that concludes our stitching. Now to finish it off, you can't really tie knots with leather or it just gets too ghastly thick. So all we're going to do is just take the end and weave it back through the existing stitches. You can do 3 or 4 of these or however many you want. Not that critical. This stitch holds the seam very, very well. It's not going anywhere. Okay, I'm just going to pass it through one more on the long side just to kind of keep that last tuck in place. There's our tucked end. We can fix a little bit of twist that we got in that one. Pull it out and then pull the twist through so it lays flat. Now as these work, I stretch those stitches up, but as this works and flattens, that'll pinch it right back down, and that's not going to go anywhere. Snip off the excess. And there is your herringbone stitch. Now we'll work out our alignment here on the other side. Just like we did on this one, punch across the bottom, punch across the top, and get that in, at which point it will look just like this with the 2 stitchings. I'm going to do that second one off camera. Here we go. We have started the process. We have made our first couple of seams. Our front panels are sewed together. The next video in this series is going to be all about the pockets. We're going to do a couple different stitches, a couple different ways of looking at that, and I hope that you'll join us for that as well and learn a couple new things in there. Again, as I mentioned in the intro to this video, we have the leather making playlist, and I'll make sure that that's linked in the end screen here at the end. And if you are interested in more information on traditional leather working, traditional patterns and constructions of clothing, like pre-modern patterns and constructions of clothing, there's a compilation of leatherwork and leatherworking skills available on our Patreon. That is available just for sale in the Patreon store, but it's also available free to all patrons at all levels. So I would love to see you over there, and it would be a big help to this channel and help us do more and better things. So if you're interested in that, go check out that link. But either way, I hope that you have a blessed day, and join us here next time at Old Ways Rising.